She told them to stay out. They laughed, ignored her, and treated her home like their personal playground, until she made sure they'd never try it again. What started as disrespect turned into a lesson the entire neighborhood would never forget. Monique Harris had never been one to ask for much. At 47 years old, she was finally living the life she had fought so hard to build. Quiet, clean, and hers. Her two-story home in Temecula, California stood proud and unbothered on a cul-de-sac surrounded by manicured lawns and polite waves. Monique wasn't one to gossip over hedges or bake cookies for neighborhood mixers. She kept her head down, paid her bills on time, and waved when it felt appropriate. What she craved most wasn't community, it was peace. And her backyard with its swaying palm trees and glistening turquoise pool was the very definition of it. That pool wasn't just water, it was a reward, a sanctuary, the product of overtime shifts, penny-pinching years, and relentless discipline. Every inch of that yard had been designed to soothe her, the chaise lounges, the wind chimes, the flowering hibiscus, every detail was hers, which made what happened all the more violating. It started small, barely a ripple in her routine. One Saturday, after a long morning of errands, Monique stepped out of her car, grocery bags in hand, and noticed something strange. A trail of wet footprints leading from her side gate to the street. Her stomach tightened. It hadn't rained. No one was scheduled to do yard work. Her mind tried to explain it away. Maybe an animal, maybe a meter reader, but then she spotted the towel. Soaked and crumpled, it hung over her back fence like it had been tossed in a rush. She dropped her bags inside and immediately stepped out to the yard. The pool water level was lower. One of her floats, usually anchored to the side, drifted freely, and on her lounge chair sat a half-empty can of Sprite. Warm, sweaty, recently abandoned. Her heart dropped. Someone had been in her yard, in her pool, without her knowing, without asking. She tightened her gate lock that evening and didn't say anything. She wanted to believe it was a one-off. A dumb kid. A dare. A thrill-seeking neighbor's teenager. That kind of thing happens sometimes. She gave it grace. She let it go. Until it happened again. And this time, she caught them in the act. It was a blazing Sunday afternoon. Monique was inside watching a rerun of Fixer Upper when she heard it splashing. At first she thought it was the wind, maybe the filter kicking on. But then came the laugh. A full-bodied, careless laugh that didn't belong to her. She walked to the patio door and peered through the blinds. There, in her private backyard, a boy, maybe 16, shirtless, pale and carefree, was swimming laps like he'd paid rent. Sitting at the edge of the pool was a girl around the same age, dangling her feet in the water like it was hers. Monique flung the door open so hard it banged against the stopper. "Excuse me," she snapped. The kids froze. The boy thrashed to the edge like a startled fish. I'm sorry," he stammered, grabbing his towel. "We didn't think anyone was home." "You didn't think to ask," Monique fired back, eyes sharp. "Who even are you?" The girl mumbled something about living 2 houses down, and before she could answer again, they were out the gate, bare feet slapping against the hot pavement. Monique stood there, trembling, not out of fear, but disbelief. She wasn't some cranky old woman yelling at clouds. She was a homeowner. A black woman in a mostly white suburb who had worked tooth and nail to create something for herself. And here they were, treating her space like a public park. The next day she marched down the street to confront the girl's parents, expecting shock and apologies. What she got was attitude. "Oh, come on," the girl's mother scoffed. "They're just kids, it's not that serious." "It's 100 degrees, the dad added. "You've got a pool, nobody's hurting anything." Monique stared at them, stunned. "Hurting something?" she repeated slowly. "This is my home, my pool. That water doesn't pay for itself. Do your kids sneak into other people's yards too, or just mine?" "You're making a big deal out of nothing," the woman said with a dry laugh, already turning back toward her garage. Monique left without another word. She could have made noise, could have called the cops. But she didn't want that. She didn't want to be seen as that neighbor. Instead, she bought a new lock for the side gate and had 2 security cameras installed, one facing the back door, one angled at the pool. That should have been enough. That should have ended it. But what happened the following weekend told her otherwise. It was late afternoon when Monique turned onto her street, still in her scrubs after a long shift at the clinic. As she pulled into her driveway, something felt off. The side gate, her freshly locked, reinforced gate, was open. Not wide, but cracked just enough to make her pulse spike. She parked, grabbed her purse, and hurried around the house. And what she saw made her stop cold. Her yard, her peaceful, meticulously cared-for haven, was full of people. Not 2 or 3, a crowd. Adults, teenagers, kids. Some were in the pool, others lounging in chairs that weren't theirs. A cooler of beer sat near her flower bed. Someone had brought chips and folding chairs. A Bluetooth speaker was blasting Drake. It looked like a cookout. Except it wasn't. It was a takeover. "Hey, girl! Hope you don't mind," a voice called. Monique turned to see Becky, a tall blonde from 3 doors down who had never said more than a wave before, lifting a solo cup in her direction like they were old friends. "It's so hot today, we figured we'd cool off." Monique's jaw clenched. "Mind?" she said, stepping forward. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "I mind a lot. Get out now." Some froze. Others exchanged looks. Becky rolled her eyes. "Don't be like that. It's just a pool. You weren't even home." "It's not just a pool," Monique snapped. "It's my pool, my house, my yard. You don't live here. You don't pay for this, so get out." Someone muttered, "Geez, what's her problem?" And that was it. That was the line. Monique stormed to her pool equipment box, yanked out the remote and shut off the filter. Then she reached behind the speaker and pulled the plug. Music cut. Laughter died. "If you're not gone in 60 seconds, I'm calling the police," she said. Now they moved, slowly, grumbling, rolling eyes, wrapping towels, chugging the last sips of beer like they had the right. Becky, as she walked past Monique, had the gall to mutter, "You don't have to be so uptight." Monique didn't respond. She just locked the gate behind them and stood there, heart pounding, lips pressed tight. This wasn't just a party. This was disrespect. Disregard. A message, loud and clear. We don't care whose space this is. We're entitled to it. And in that moment, Monique knew reasoning was over. Warnings were done. These people didn't care about boundaries. So she would show them what happened when you crossed hers. This wasn't about a pool. This was about dignity. And next time anyone who thought of stepping into her yard uninvited would regret it. Monique stood on her back porch long after the last uninvited guest had slunk out. Her arms were crossed, lips pressed tight, and eyes fixed on the shimmering surface of the pool. Her pool, that still rippled from their intrusion. The sun had dipped behind the palm trees, but her anger hadn't cooled. She had always believed in doing things the right way. Be polite, be firm, be reasonable. But clearly those rules didn't apply when the world didn't see you as someone worth respecting. That night, she sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through the security footage, watching them laugh, drink, splash, and lounge like they had every right to be there. Becky's smug wave, the teenagers tossing towels like they owned the place, the man who parked a fold-out chair right on her flower bed. They had seen her warnings, heard her voice, and still decided that her no didn't matter. That was the part that stung the most, not the mess, not the noise, but the entitlement. The complete disregard for her space, her effort, her boundaries. And if asking nicely hadn't worked, there was time to speak a language they couldn't ignore. The plan came to her quicker than she expected. Not rage, not revenge, something cleaner, smarter. Monique had no intention of calling the cops or banging on doors. That would only feed the narrative. Angry black woman can't get along with the neighbors. No, she was going to do this with precision. She started with the locks. The hardware store clerk tried to sell her the mid-tier option, but she shook her head and went straight for the industrial-grade padlocks. the kind that could survive a hurricane. She added one to the pool equipment box and another to the side gate. Then she went home and got online. She remembered reading once about a harmless chemical used in public pools to discourage rule breakers. Pool dye. Not dangerous, but effective. When someone urinates in the water, it triggers a reaction that turns the water a sickly shade of green. Embarrassing, obvious, impossible to deny, she ordered it without hesitation, along with a few other items to complete the illusion. A bright yellow caution, hazardous chemical, container from a prop supplier. A warning sign she customized online that read, "Warning, pool chemically treated for unauthorized use. Exposure may cause rash, itching and temporary skin discoloration." It was bold. It was fake. And it was exactly what she needed. By the following weekend, everything was in place. The sign was drilled into the back fence, large and impossible to miss. The fake chemical container sat beside the pump system, angled perfectly for anyone peeking through the slats. And just for good measure, she placed a motion-activated light near the gate. So at night, any movement would be greeted by a blinding flood of illumination. Monique didn't expect applause. She just wanted her peace back. She poured herself a glass of iced tea, settled into her living room and waited. It didn't take long. Late Saturday afternoon, a pair of teenage boys wandered down the sidewalk, skateboards under their arms. She watched from the window as they slowed near the fence. One pointed to the sign, the other squinted at the chemical jug. They exchanged a few words, then turned and walked the other way. Monique smiled. A few hours later, Becky, yes, that Becky, walked by with her tiny white dog. She stopped, did a double take at the sign, pulled out her phone and snapped a picture. Within 20 minutes, it was on Facebook. Monique knew because one of her co-workers, who lived 3 streets over, sent her a screenshot. The caption read, "FYI, looks like Monique put some weird chemicals in her pool. Not sure how safe that is for the neighborhood, just a heads up." The comments lit up instantly. That doesn't sound legal. Isn't she a nurse or something? What is she trying to prove? Maybe just let people cool off? What's the big deal? Monique read every word, sipping her tea with the calm of someone who'd already won. Because none of them were worried about the party being wrong, they were worried about the consequences. They were mad not because they were right, but because they realized they couldn't get away with it anymore. The next evening, just after dinner, there was a knock on her front door. It was sharp, impatient, and unmistakably annoyed. Monique didn't need to check the peephole, she already knew. She opened the door to find Becky standing on her porch, arms folded, phone still in hand. "We need to talk," Becky snapped. "Do we?" Monique replied coolly. Becky's nostrils flared. "People are saying you put chemicals in your pool, toxic ones. That's dangerous. What if a kid touches the water?" "A kid who climbs over my locked gate?" Monique asked, eyebrow raised. "That's not the point," Becky shot back. "No," Monique said, stepping forward. "It's exactly the point. I told people to stay out. They didn't listen. So now they're listening." Becky let out a short, bitter laugh. "This is ridiculous. You don't even have kids. You live alone. That pool just sits there all day. It's a waste." And there it was, the entitlement, plain and ugly. "So because I don't have kids," Monique said slowly, "that means my property is up for public use? Is that how this works now?" Becky rolled her eyes. "You know what I mean. You could be a little more neighborly. No one was hurting anything." Monique didn't blink. "If I walked into your yard, opened a beer and started tanning on your patio, would that be neighborly?" Becky faltered. "That's not the same." "It's exactly the same," Monique snapped. "You don't pay for my water. You don't clean my pool. You didn't spend years building this life, but you think you're owed a piece of it just because it's there." Becky was silent. Monique let the silence stretch. Finally, Becky muttered, "Well, enjoy being the mean neighbor," and turned to leave. Monique called after her, "Enjoy using your own hose this summer." The door clicked shut, and the quiet settled around her like a well-worn blanket. Monique exhaled deeply, her muscles finally relaxing. But just to be sure, just to drive the point home, she installed one final touch the next morning, a sleek, nearly invisible motion-activated sprinkler system along the inside of her fence line. Anyone who climbed in would be greeted not just with chemical warning signs, but with a freezing burst of water strong enough to send them running. It was petty. It was extra. And it was perfect. But she never had to use it. Not once. The intrusions stopped. No more wet footprints, no more floating soda cans, no more Becky. Her pool remained hers, untouched and pristine. And for the first time in months, Monique could sit under the palms with her feet in the water, eyes closed, listening to nothing but the wind. No police reports, no shouting matches, just boundaries, clear, enforced, and finally respected. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't begged. She had simply flipped the script. Because some people don't understand no until you give them a reason to be afraid of yes. Monique didn't do it for revenge. She did it for peace. And peace, she had learned, sometimes requires more than patience. Sometimes it takes strategy and a little chlorine-colored creativity. The sign had done its job. The fake chemical container had sealed the deal. Becky's Facebook post had whipped the neighborhood into a minor panic, and Monique, she hadn't felt this calm in months. Her backyard was quiet again. No laughter, no splashing, no music thumping through her walls like she was living next to a college frat house. Just birds, breeze, and the soft rustle of palm fronds. But Monique wasn't one to take peace for granted anymore. She knew better now. Her mistake hadn't been being too stern or too cold. Her mistake had been assuming people would respect boundaries if you simply asked them to. So, as she sipped her tea the next morning, feet dipped into the cool water, she made a final decision. One last layer of insurance. She pulled out her laptop, clicked through a few home improvement forums, and by lunchtime had purchased a motion-activated sprinkler system with enough pressure to knock the flip-flops off a teenager. It arrived 3 days later. She spent the entire afternoon installing it. Small, sleek nozzles lined discreetly along the inside of the fence, rigged to detect motion after dark or any time she armed the system from her phone. The idea wasn't to drench anyone for fun. It was to send a message. This is not your space. And even though Monique had no interest in confrontation, she was absolutely done playing the polite game. If anyone so much as set foot in her yard uninvited, they'd get a very cold, very public wake-up call. But the beauty was, she never had to use it. Not once. The sign, the dye, the rumors, they had all done what years of civility couldn't. The boundary was back in place, and this time people stayed on their side of it. Weeks passed, then a month. The gate remained locked, the cameras untouched, the grass untrampled. There were no more crumpled towels tossed over her fence, no more stray soda cans left behind, no unfamiliar voices drifting into her kitchen while she was just trying to cook dinner. Becky walked her dog past Monique's house twice a day now, quietly. She didn't wave anymore, but she didn't smirk either. A few neighbors went out of their way to look the other direction. Monique didn't mind. She didn't need their smiles. She wasn't looking for friendship, just respect. And finally she had it. Not because they suddenly liked her, but because they realized they couldn't ignore her. The funny thing was, Monique hadn't changed. She was still the same woman who smiled at the mailman, tipped well, and mowed her lawn like clockwork. She still drank the same tea every morning, still pruned her roses every Sunday. But the neighborhood saw her differently now. Because they had been forced to. That's the part that stuck with her most, not the trespassing, not even the parties, but the fact that it had taken this much to be heard. For a woman like Monique, in a place like Temecula, being quiet had never meant being weak, but people treated her that way anyway, until she made it impossible for them not to listen. One evening, while Monique was enjoying the last of the golden hour by the pool, a soft knock tapped at her front door. Not the kind of knock that demanded anything. It was hesitant, almost unsure. She paused, then stood, wrapping her towel around her waist and walking through the house. When she opened the door, she didn't expect who she saw. It was Sharon, the woman from the end of the block, the one who usually stuck to her garden and nodded from afar but never said much else. Sharon held a mason jar of iced tea in one hand, her other hand nervously clutching her purse strap. "Hey," she said quietly, I wanted to say I admire how you handled everything." Monique raised an eyebrow, curious. Sharon took a breath. "People were out of line, and it's not your job to be everyone's free vacation. I know some of them made it sound like you overreacted, but you didn't. You set a boundary. That's not rude, it's survival." Monique didn't say anything for a moment. Then she stepped aside. "You want to sit for a minute?" Sharon smiled and nodded. They sat in the backyard sipping tea, watching the last of the daylight dance across the water. Sharon talked a little about her job, her daughter off at college, how she'd seen what happened but hadn't known what to do. Monique just listened. That was enough, because for once someone wasn't looking to take, they were just looking to understand. After Sharon left, Monique walked back out to the pool, alone again, but not lonely. The sky was dark now, stars blinking into view, the water calm and untouched. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly at peace. And not because everyone liked her now, but because they had learned to leave her alone. Her home was hers again, her sanctuary restored. Looking back, Monique didn't regret a single step, not the dye, not the sign, not the sprinklers. She knew some people probably still thought she was extra or dramatic or cold, but those people had never been walked over in their own yard. They'd never come home to strangers, using what they had worked for like it was theirs. And more importantly, they didn't know what it felt like to be a black woman constantly told to smile more, to be friendlier, to relax. Monique wasn't here to make people comfortable. She was here to be respected. In the months that followed, the pool stayed clean, the gates stayed shut, and the gossip faded into old news. Occasionally a kid would ride by on a bike, glance at the sign, and pedal faster. Monique would smile to herself. It was working. The silence wasn't empty, it was earned. And if anyone ever tried to cross the line again, she'd be ready. Not with rage, not with noise, but with the quiet power of a woman who had drawn her line and meant it. Because the truth was simple. People will take what you let them, your time, your space, your peace, and sometimes even your damn pool. But if you don't protect it, if you don't make the cost of disrespect higher than the convenience of taking, they'll never stop. So no, Monique wasn't mean, she wasn't bitter, she wasn't overreacting. She was just done being quiet in a world that only hears you when you scream. And in reclaiming her space, she had taught the neighborhood something they didn't even realize they needed to learn. Respect isn't granted because you smile. It isn't earned through small talk or birthday cupcakes. It's forged through boundaries, enforced with consistency, and protected by those who refuse to be stepped on. And for Monique Harris, respect had finally found its rightful home, right there, behind that locked gate, under the California sun, where the water ran crystal clear, and the silence spoke volumes. There's something deeply personal about the idea of home. It's not just a roof over your head. It's your refuge, your boundary, your sanctuary from a world that often doesn't listen. For Monique Harris, her backyard wasn't just a space to relax. It was a symbol of everything she had built with hard work, sacrifice, and self-respect. And when that space was violated, what hurt most wasn't the noise or the trespassing, it was the assumption that her no didn't matter, that her voice wasn't enough. The lesson here is simple but powerful. If you don't enforce your boundaries, someone will always cross them. It doesn't matter if it's your time, your space, your peace, or your energy. People will take as much as you let them. Kindness is a strength, but it should never come at the cost of being stepped on. Monique tried being polite, she tried explaining, she gave warnings, and still she was ignored. Only when she stood her ground and made the cost of disrespect clear, did people start paying attention. This story isn't about pettiness or revenge. It's about reclaiming dignity, about knowing when enough is enough, about understanding that protecting your peace isn't something you ever have to apologize for. And for every woman, especially every black woman, who's ever been told she was too much, too strict, or too cold, let this be your reminder. You do not owe anyone access to your life just because they think they're entitled to it. You do not have to explain why your boundaries exist. The people who respect you won't need convincing, and the ones who don't, they were never listening anyway. So if you're facing a situation where people keep crossing the line, let Monique's story remind you, you have every right to draw that line and to defend it fiercely. Thank you so much for listening to today's story here on US Justice Story. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to stand your ground or reclaim your peace in the face of disrespect, I hope you found strength in Monique's journey. We all deserve to feel safe, respected, and heard, especially in the spaces we call our own. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. And I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to enforce a boundary that others didn't take seriously? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going. Until next time, remember this: your peace is worth protecting, and your voice deserves to be heard.